Welcome to the Panic Room, where we talk about all things panic-inducing. I am the Queen of Panic. Warning, some episodes may contain content that may be disturbing to others. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let the games begin.
My grandfather, Jim, died when I was 17, around 5 years ago, and his last months were rough on the whole family. He had advanced brain cancer, but he spent most of his time at home under hospice care. One afternoon, it was about 2 weeks before Jim died, I was alone with my grandpa, waiting for the hospice nurse to come check in on him. A man who I'd never seen before, Dave, knocked on the door. He was wearing hospital scrubs, but he hadn't brought any equipment with him, which was odd. I asked him if he worked for the hospital, and he nodded. He said this was his first shift with Jim, but that he'd reviewed my grandfather's file, and that he wanted to speak to whichever family member had the legal authority to pull the plug. Jim wasn't even on life support, so I guess Dave was using plug as an expression on my grandfather. I should say that I live in a right-to-die state where euthanasia is legal, so it's not like that option had never occurred to us. But as far as I know, no member of my family had ever expressed an openness to euthanizing Jim. I told him that I had no authority to make that decision, and that my grandfather, who was now delirious and unable to consent to much of anything, had specifically said to prolong his life indefinitely, unless he was crying out in extreme pain, which he wasn't. Dave put his hand on my shoulder as though he was consoling me. But he talked about how old people become burdens that their families need to let go of. Then, Dave pulled out a bottle of pills out of his pocket and said that they were barbiturates and would trigger a peaceful death. He said the coroner would determine that Jim died naturally from his cancer. I started to panic, and I firmly told him that under no circumstances would we be euthanizing Jim at this time. But he started to untwist the bottle as he walked towards Jim's bed. I tried to wrestle the pills from his hand, and he seemed startled. He played innocent and said he just wanted to show the pills to Jim. Dave knew perfectly well that my grandfather had no idea what was going on. I called 911 and rapidly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Dave suddenly became very scared and bolted out of the house. The cops arrived within 5 minutes. And Jim's actual hospice nurse arrived a few minutes after that. Based on my physical description, the police/hospital staff were able to identify Dave as a recently fired hospital orderly. Dave was charged with making a criminal threat based on my testimony, but unfortunately, he was acquitted. So Dave, wherever you are, let's never meet again. This happened in 1989. I had given birth to my son early in the morning the day before. I'd lost a fair bit of blood, but had been waking up at least once by then, so wasn't too dopey. My son was sleeping in his bassinet next to my bed. A nurse I hadn't seen before came into my room and grabbed hold of one end of the bassinet and started to pull it away. I grabbed the other end and said, "What are you doing?" She said she was taking him away for his blood tests. Now, I happened to be a registered nurse, and I knew what sort of things were done to newborns, and he already had his tests. I pointed to the Band-Aid on his heel and said, "He's already had his tests. So what sort of tests are you talking about?" And she muttered something about not being sure, but there was some tests that he needed. I maintained my fast hold on the bassinet and told her to find out what tests and then let me know. She went away and never came back. And honestly, I was so out of it, I never even thought to mention it to anyone. But the fact is, several babies had been taken that summer by imposters dressed in uniforms. So I will never know for sure if I felt like we dodged a bullet. I'm a doctor and a 32-year-old single man who spends most of his time in the hospital. It was a Friday. After completing my shift, I was just back to my apartment. I was tired and hungry. But then I was called again. Apparently, there was some high-profile accident going on. She was a girl of 24, only daughter of the local mayor. She had fractured an arm, a bad wound on the elbow which required 5 stitches. Shards of glass had pierced her shoulder deep, barely missing the jugular. It took me hours to patch her up and head home. A week went by. I kept checking her progress, and she was coping well. She was very friendly, but nothing about it made me uncomfortable. I understand since COVID protocols didn't allow visitors to stay, she yearned for someone to talk to. But with each passing day, she grew bolder. Friendliness turned into flirting, which I tried to handle with my best professional smiling face and silence. Soon her infatuation became the hot topic of canteen discussions and leg pulling, and I began to avoid canteen. It was a normal summer day and I was doing my rounds. I reached her room, and keeping my best stoic face, I began checking for vitals. She said she was feeling pain in her shoulder. I knew glass wounds were deep, but so far they had been healing just fine. After telling her I was about to pull her gown down to have a look, I barely managed to touch it, and she pulled it all the way down to her belly in one tug. I froze. I kept my eyes on the wound. It appeared to be healing normally. I averted my eyes and told her so, but she insisted I have a closer look. Her hands touched me inappropriately, and I decided it was best to walk out. By the time I reached the door, she said something so vulgar and inappropriate that it made me cringe in disgust. I marched out without turning back. I thought it was best I told someone before I was accused of something I did not do. So I told about her advances to my fellow doctor who was of my age, and his words were appalling. In the coarsest way possible, he insinuated that if he was me, he would jump at this chance, and laughed it off that I was scared of a female. I decided it was best I got to go to COVID duty and stay clear of trouble. And I easily got that. I did not see her, and heard she was discharged. I almost forgot about her in the rush of corona patients. A week later, she was admitted with mild COVID symptoms, and her father literally arm-twisted hospital management by holding supplies to provide her with private ward and special care. All of a sudden, she became the most important patient. People were dying in that hospital daily. People whose organs were failing them, whose oxygen saturation was making them struggle for each breath. And we were short to just 4 doctors. The rest were either infected or quarantined by now. And here Hospital MGT was busy providing VIP patient treatment to an insolent brat. After 2 days, I had to go check on her. She had a fever. PPE kit made it difficult for her to identify me. But as soon as I introduced myself, she had this bizarre smile on her face. She looked unstable with her messy hair, sweaty and sick look. As I reached near her, she caught my PPE suit in her hand. Her nails were digging into the polymer, nearly tearing it apart. Shocked, I tried to pull back as she began rambling sexual stuff. Amidst her crazy, uncensored yelling, I checked what I had to, and pulled out of her hold and exited the room. Later that day, I talked to the management. They took it casually, because they had bigger issues at hand like the pandemic. And what harm can a sick woman do to a buffed-up 6'3" guy? Hearing this, I decided that it was time I left this place. For my own mental peace, I resigned and joined another hospital in a different state. Just to preface, this happened about 8 to 9 years ago, and at the time I was very dumb and naive to just about everything. Thinking about it now, I just really feel creeped out by the whole thing. Okay, so when I was 16 years old, I was in a car accident that left me with some lower back pain. After a few months of physical therapy, my primary referred me to a back specialist at another clinic. My first visit with this elderly doctor, he talked to me for not even 2 minutes, then handed me a hospital gown and said, "Take off all your clothes and put this on so I can inspect your back." I remember asking him if I can keep my bra on and do not need to take my pants off, and he said yes, take everything off. So I stripped down to nothing but my thong and put on the hospital gown. He came back in the room and had me stand with my face against the wall as he felt around asking where it hurt. I remember feeling like embarrassed and uncomfortable as he was rubbing my lower back, and that he could see my whole ass because I was only wearing a thong. Anyway, after we were done, he sat down before I had gotten dressed and said, "Okay, so do you want me to write you a script for some oxycodone?" Didn't say anything else about my pain and asked me to come back in a week. Well, a week went by and I remember canceling my appointment and not bothering to reschedule because I was thinking, if he's just going to give me pain meds, I'm wasting my time. His assistants then called me every week for a few months, telling me that the doctor was concerned about my back and my pain and wanted me to come back in. Typing this out and reading it back seems like not even a big deal, but the gut feeling I had while I was there was extremely uncomfortable and was really bizarre that he offered me oxycodone at my age, when I had told him my pain wasn't even that bad and was getting better. Thinking back, I feel like this was creepy and weird with the consistent calling me back to come in when I had said I didn't need to. I also feel it was weird to have me stripped down when I could have just lifted up my shirt. This happened a few years ago. I did some work experience at a funeral home, and on one of the mornings, myself and another member of our team had to go to a mental health facility. The building was very old looking when we arrived through its gates, and when we went inside it seemed massive. It sounded like our voices were an echo. We were there to pick up an item from someone recently deceased, and were taken to a room to wait for the person in charge. It was pretty silent for a while, but then a woman appeared at the office door, opened it, came inside quickly, and then smashed the door closed again as quickly as possible. She suddenly turned to us and explained that a patient had become violent and was running around outside in the corridors. This alone was scary enough for me, but then within seconds, the patient came to the door and looked through the window. She banged on the door, screaming something I couldn't understand. A male nurse then appeared and took her away to her room as quickly as she had appeared. We then sorted out what we came for with the woman in charge, and then we proceeded to get up to leave. We started to walk down the corridor towards the exit, but I started to hear a noise in one of the open rooms. I looked inside, and it was dark apart from a man watching TV on his own. The light from the TV was the only way I was able to make out the outline of the man. He started mumbling something really quietly, but suddenly, out of nowhere, became really loud and started shouting. He was shouting something along the lines of, "Help me now," just over and over again. I was terrified and could not get to that exit quickly enough. I never had to go back there again, and I'm glad I didn't. This happened last November 2020. I was in the hospital room due to mastitis. It was one of the worst days of my life. Anyway, there was this man. He was really tall and big. He was holding his crutches and went to sit on his wheelchair. It took me a lot of time in the emergency waiting for my turn. He's also a patient there waiting. And then while sitting 10 feet away from this man, from what I saw, I think he was sleeping or something, I have no idea. He was growling like a dog, or a horse. Everyone in the emergency department looked at him, even the nurses. I was really scared when he was growling, and the growling was increasing by the minute. A nurse went to his side and asked him if he was okay. He stopped doing it. It was like 5 minutes of growling like a dog. It was really weird, but I did not get any answer because he just stopped doing it. I wonder what happened to him. Any idea of why he did that? Was he dreaming? It was really weird. I thought of zombies in my head, but that's too much. But really, it's a crazy experience. I hope this is the right subreddit for this. Also, apologies in advance if this is super long. I've had a few months to process everything, and now I can finally collect my thoughts and tell the story. Back in July, a good friend and coworker of mine passed away suddenly. We will call her Jane. Jane was in her early 60s, which is a big age gap in comparison to me, but she was like a mother figure to me. She never had kids and always considered me a daughter. I've known her for about 4 years prior to her passing. The day she got admitted to the hospital, nobody at work knew. She didn't show up for her shift, so we sensed something was wrong. Her landlord came into the store that day and told us what happened. That he saw her car sitting in the driveway, but knew she works on Wednesdays, so he thought it was odd. He knocked on the door, called her phone, but no answer to either. He then knew something was wrong, so he phoned 911. They found her on the couch, unconscious. She had suffered from multiple strokes. When the landlord told us this, I immediately went to the hospital along with my other colleagues. She had no kids, parents, siblings, etc. I knew she had a boyfriend, but they didn't live together. I asked her landlord if the boyfriend knew, and he said no. I figured the best thing to do is get in contact with someone close to her. The people at the hospital kept asking me if I knew anyone that I could contact, any family at all. I told them no, but that I knew she had a boyfriend named Steve, not his real name, but we'll use it for the story. The next day I was off work, but I got a call from my colleague saying Steve was at the store because he was worried about Jane. He hasn't heard from her, so he wanted to call and see if she was working. My colleagues told Steve he better give me a call because she didn't want to be the one to tell him the news. Shortly after I hang up with this colleague, I get a call from Steve. I told him what happened, and he sounded very worried and asked what hospital she was in. I told him, and I mentioned that I would be also going to the hospital that day to see her. When I get there, Steve arrives shortly after. Now I know everyone grieves differently, but he was acting very odd. I was bawling like a baby. I am very emotional, though, and he seemed cold and distant, barely stood next to her. Also, to my understanding, they were dating for 12 plus years. They used to live together, but Jane moved out into her own place. When the nurses came in to talk to Steve, they asked him a bunch of questions. They asked him questions like if she had any pets, where she worked, where she lived, her employment status. He got all the questions wrong. He said she lived in a completely different city that's almost an hour away. He said that she had no pets, but she had 2 cats that were everything to her. Everyone at work knew she had cats because she talked about them nonstop. He also said she was part-time, but she was actually full-time. The nurse was so thrown off by this and thought this was strange how a long-term boyfriend knew nothing about his girlfriend after that long together. The nurse even told me in private that she got bad vibes from him because how weird he was acting towards the whole situation. During the hospital visit, the landlord ended up showing up and Steve got into a huge argument with him. He asked who the hell he was and didn't even know Jane was renting. He thought she moved into her late parents' house after she moved out from his place. The landlord said he wasn't going to give any information to Steve and stayed quiet. After Steve left, the landlord told me very, very concerning things. I was so emotional at the time, but now that I think back on it, I'm like, what the actual hell? The landlord told me that he and Jane had known each other for a long time, and that Jane knew he had properties he was renting out. So she asked him if she could please rent one because she needed to get out of Steve's house. She told him that Steve was crazy and nuts, and that she's worried he would hurt her because he made several threatening remarks. So the landlord offered one of his homes for her to rent, which is the house the 911 found her at. This information was a shock to me, but like I said, at the time I was so emotional and wasn't thinking like how I would do now. During the whole time Jane was in the hospital, Steve would text me and ask how she was doing, if I was there and he wasn't, and vice versa. Nothing out of the ordinary. The hospital got a hold of Jane's family in another state, and they made the decision to take her off life support since the damage from the strokes were so severe. Steve called me and said he is a mess and so distraught. He asked me if I could please be a support system for him and keep in touch because he felt like his world was tearing apart. I told him yes, and that if he ever needed anything to call. He began texting me almost every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. Like I said, at first when she was in the hospital, I appreciated the texts because they were updates on her condition. But after that, I felt like the texting should be more minimal, to none at all anymore. I didn't know him at all other than Jane, and her telling me about him sometimes. But I felt bad at the same time because I know grieving is such a hard thing to go through. So I wrote back but kept it short. The text started from things like, when do you think her service will be? Which I don't mind. But then they just got weird. And he was asking me about my day and if I was working, just things that were off topic. I didn't mind speaking to him if it pertained to Jane or her service, but I was not going to text him about other personal things. I stopped responding eventually. When Jane's service approached, Steve was there. At the end of the service, Steve said his goodbyes to everyone, and then when he saw me, he said in a low voice, "The next time I text you, please respond back to me." My coworker who was next to me heard this and thought this was very strange. I didn't respond and just left. Later, as the days go on, I start getting more texts from him. I stopped responding. After a while, I got annoyed from this and texted him saying that I understand he is grieving, but that the texts were just not about Jane and they were too personal. I wasn't interested in speaking to him anymore about this kind of stuff, and even told him my boyfriend does not want me to text him anymore as of today. He just said okay, and I actually didn't hear from him for quite a bit of time. That was until a few days ago. I was at work, and Steve came in through the doors. He said hello to all my colleagues and asked them how they were doing. He saw me and tried to talk to me, but luckily I was with a customer, so he ended up leaving. Then, just today, the same thing happened. He came in and started talking to everyone at my counter. He saw me, but again, I was with someone, so he left. Every time he comes into the store, he doesn't buy anything either. I'm actually concerned at this point. I haven't really told anyone at work the full story because I tried to at one point, and I feel like they were on his side, saying he is just grieving and needs someone to talk to. I've questioned if I'm overreacting at this point, or if I was rude to Steve. I don't know. What do you guys think? When I was 6 to 7 years old, I was in a suburb hospital with my mom. My diagnosis was dysentery. It hurt like hell. I was screaming from the pain till the doctors gave me shots in my butt cheeks. But that is not the story. The story is that my hospital room was on the first floor, with windows looking into the inner yard. There was a toilet in the room, and also a door leading from the toilet to that yard, if I remember that correctly. But I think it's a very strange place for the door, right? I'll ask my mom about it later. I was getting better some days later, and then this happened. Someone suddenly started bashing at the window without breaking it, just loudly knocking. I looked at the window and saw a naked man there just jerking it. I was terrified. My mom was there with me, and I was fearing the fact that he could go inside the room using that toilet door. We ran out of the room, and my mom called the personnel to deal with it. I don't remember how this was solved, but the interesting fact is that I totally forgot about that event. I remembered it at the age of 17 to 18, when my brother briefly mentioned the jerking man in the window, and that memory just came to me again. It's strange how a child's brain can protect itself from shocking events. Trigger warning. Graphic. So I recently wrote about this encounter, and it reminded me of the following story. It was so horrible. I must have blocked it out. It happened years ago. Important to the story, I'm male and I'm straight. So I'm a young doctor working in urology clinic. I see this guy in his 50s. There was just something off about him. Something slimy. Anyway, I don't think much of it and I do my job. His main complaint was erectile dysfunction. I'm new and inexperienced, so I help him thoroughly. Maybe a bit too thoroughly. This would include extensive questioning regarding his sex life, physical examination of his external genitalia, a digital rectal examination, bloods, the whole 9 yards. Now, I try to make my patients comfortable. It's not always easy for an older guy to talk about his junk to a stranger. So I make an effort to chat with them, make a few jokes, make them feel special, stuff like that. So I do it with this guy also. I prescribe a PDE 5i and give him a follow update to come and discuss the results of the blood work. Skip to 2 weeks later, I'm in the clinic again, and I pull the file of this guy, let's call him Mr. Smith. So Mr. Smith comes into my consultation room and sits next to me. The room is spaced in such a way that I'm behind a table, but his chair is right next to my chair on the same side of the table. I know, right? Public hospitals. He shoves his stool cozily next to mine and sits facing me. His legs wide apart, he starts. You know, doctor, I'm so glad you got my file today. I missed you. How are you, Mr. Smith? He ignores my question. You know, I'm glad it's you because that other doctor working here, I think he's one of those gays. And we don't like gays, do we, doctor? He touches my leg. Do we, doctor? I don't really know what to make of this, but I take his hand off my leg and continue. Mr. Smith, how are those tablets working for you? He giggles. Wouldn't you like to know? You know, I love how personal you get with me. I even got a funny clip on my phone the other day that reminded me of us, and I promised myself I would show it to you. He takes out his phone and starts scrolling through the clips. Oh, this isn't the one, but it's funny too. He holds the phone eagerly to my face. It's a clip about a guy drawing a palm tree. But then, as he keeps drawing, it turns into a penis, and the coconuts are the testes and the palm leaves are the pubes. There's a couple of sketches like that. Mr. Smith, please, let's get on with it. No, doctor, please, just that one clip. You were so friendly last time. I like you, too. He scrolls further. Then his eyes light up. Here it is, doctor. This is the one. It's very funny. Oh, it reminds me of us so much. He eagerly holds the phone to my face again. The clip starts with a huge white man. He is just standing there, naked. I think, okay, this may still be funny. So you hear a door open, and in comes another massive man in a doctor's outfit. So, you are the patient? He says. Yes, doctor, the naked man answers. Lie down, the doctor says. So the naked man lies down. I'm still waiting for the punchline. So the huge doctor starts examining the naked man. He accidentally touches the naked man's crotch. Nice penis, he comments. Why, thank you, says the patient. Something starts feeling horribly wrong to me. I look at Mr. Smith. He is eagerly holding the phone in my face, but he isn't looking at it. He's looking at me, almost giddy, smiling from ear to ear, childlike excitement in his eyes. Mr. Smith, why would you think I want to see this? No, doctor, just keep watching. It gets better. It's us. The last thing I saw before forcefully removing the phone from his hand and shutting off the clip was the doctor starting to give the patient a hand job. He was showing me gay porn. I rushed through the consultation, dismissed Mr. Smith, and then I got up, walked out of the clinic across to the other side of the hospital. I went and stood on the landing pad of the helicopter and freaked the fuck out. I thought, no, I'm overreacting. It's just taking it badly because I was molested as a child. It was just a pass he made. Anybody can make a pass at anybody, right? Right? It's normal. I'm saying these things to myself as I'm standing there sobbing like a 6-year-old boy. So after I pulled myself together, I went to the trauma unit next to the landing pad. The clinic could wait a few minutes, and told the story to the doctors on call there as a joke. Like it's just a funny antidote. But nobody laughs. They look horrified. They keep asking me if I'm okay, if they could maybe make me coffee or something. That's the only reason I knew what happened to me was unacceptable. How messed up is that? Mr. Smith came in a few times again, but I made a point of never taking his file. Fuck him. And then, apparently, I blocked the whole thing out. That's until the other day when I wrote the previous story. Note, I want to clarify I don't have a problem with homosexuality or even gay porn, but I do feel that it's okay for me not to want to look at it. If you would like to submit your stories, please check out the Panic Within subreddit. I go over those stories that are submitted, and I go ahead and I narrate them. I say go over, but I narrate all of them. So if you are interested in something like that, go ahead and take a look in the description, and you'll find the link there. We also have a Discord. You can come and hang out and get spooky with me and other narrators. We post new content, up-and-coming videos, promotions, and we also just hang out and chat, and you can come and hang out with us there. If you're interested in that, link is also in the description below. And last but not least, if you are interested in doing a collab with the King of Panic or myself, you can absolutely reach out if you're another creator. You can do one on our channel. We can do one with you. We are completely open for collab as of right now. Looking for new stuff to do and very excited for anybody who reaches out. The best way to do that is through Twitter or Discord. I do check Instagram and I will get back. It just might take a little longer because I'm super bad at that, but I've been trying to be better. So if you do reach out there, even if it takes a couple days, I'll be there. But like I said, we're excited. So please definitely reach out and we're looking forward to it. And as always, thank you for visiting the Panic Room. You have successfully made it to the next portion of your tour. Please stay tuned for your next prompt. Click the like button and subscribe to receive notifications for when the next portion of your tour is ready to join. Thank you for watching. Don't let the panic drown you.